Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. Well, today we've put together for you a deep dive on the incoming Trump cabinet. The people President-elect Donald Trump has selected to be his team when he's sworn in this January. And to do that, we are bringing you some of their appearances on the Megyn Kelly Show over the past few years. First up is Tulsi Gabbard, nominated to be the Director of National Intelligence. Tulsi's been on with me many times over the years, but a notable appearance was episode 846 from July of this year, right after the swap from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. Given her history with the Democratic Party, Tulsi was the perfect person to talk to about it. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X. For those of us holding our breath for the past several months, we can exhale a little in the wake of this election. Work can finally be done on the major issues this country's facing, one of the most significant being our national debt. The fact is, we're broke, and that debt in our nation is a house of cards that cannot be quickly dismantled. So the strategy remains the same. You might want to diversify your savings. This is why I want to tell you about Birch Gold. So many things are out of our control, out of our president's control. So it can be important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group can help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news is it does not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Text MK to 989898 to get your free info kit. Plus, right now, through Black Friday, you will receive a free 1-ounce silver eagle for every $5,000 purchased. Protect your savings with Birch Gold. Text MK to 989898 and claim your eligibility for free silver today.
President Biden's selfless decision has given the Democratic Party the opportunity to unite behind a new nominee, and boy, oh boy, are we enthusiastic. When I spoke with her Sunday, she said she wanted the opportunity to win the nomination on her own and to do so from the grassroots up, not top down. She would work to earn the support of our party, and boy, has she done so in quick order. So now that the process is played out, from the grassroots bottom up, we are here today to throw our support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm clapping. You don't have to. It's a happy day. What can I say?
And they didn't clap. And for the listening audience, while he's doing this bit, he's pumping his fist like, yay, we can do it. Both fists together, swaying, bottom up, grassroots, just in case you didn't hear. Welcome back to the Megyn Kelly Show. Who better to talk about all of this with than my next guest, Tulsi Gabbard. She was a 2020 presidential candidate on the Dem side, and she is author of the book For Love of Country, Leave the Democrat Party Behind. So you know how things went over there. Tulsi, great to have you back, especially so soon. But why shouldn't we, given the monumental developments since you were last on? This was a grassroots, bottom-up, quote, process that was really given to the voters, just in case you weren't aware, definitely not top-down. True?
Yeah, sure. If you buy what Chuck Schumer is selling, which I don't for a second. I was laughing as you played that clip, Megyn, because, gosh, it's just so telling in so many ways, ending with him being the only guy clapping.
In front of
it really
like loyal Democrats and campaign operatives, nonetheless.
Exactly. It really said it all about who's actually made the decision here. And it's not the rank and file Democrats. And we got to go all the way back to when the Democratic presidential primaries were supposed to occur. Stark contrast to when I ran in 2020. In that presidential primary where you actually had primaries, and there were a lot of different choices from voters to select from. How that pre-curation and pre-selection process occurred between the Democratic Party and the mainstream propaganda media back then is another topic for another conversation. But at least there were many names on the ballot, and voters had the opportunity to go and cast their vote for the candidate of their choosing. In this election now in 2024, many states didn't even have primaries. We actually had a few people who stepped up to run against Joe Biden in the primary election, and their names were not allowed to be on some ballots in these states. So to say that, first of all, there was even a democratic process to select Joe Biden to be the nominee is a pure lie. And that lie is continuing on now as they try to create this new narrative and this facade of how the Democratic Party is going to the grassroots from the bottom on up to select Kamala Harris as the nominee. None of that has happened. What are we at? It's Wednesday now. This announcement was just made that President Biden was not going to run on Sunday. Where was the bottom-up grassroots voices being heard and votes being cast now for Kamala Harris to be the new Democratic nominee? It's a lie. It hasn't happened. They have decided that she will be the nominee, but they're trying to pretend as though that this is a decision being made by the American people, or certainly Democratic primary voters, to try to bolster her position rather than seeing it for what it actually is, which is a coronation by the Democrat elite who've been calling the shots for Joe Biden, who's been a figurehead for the Democrat elite for the last 3.5 years. And now they see in Kamala Harris someone who will continue to be a figurehead and who will do whatever they tell her to do.
That's exactly right. She's going to owe them. She's going to owe them big. It's right on brand, though, Tulsi, for the Democrat Party and what we've seen recently, where we've just been through years of them telling us not to believe our lying eyes when it came to Joe Biden's decline. And then when it was no longer, they were no longer capable of hiding it, and Kamala subs in, don't believe your lying eyes that this looked like a top-down effort. She was made the nominee by fiat. You guys really actually voted for it. This came from you, the grassroots. And I have to say, of all the ones to object, finally you see BLM coming out and saying, this is not okay. She's been placed in there. We object to this. We do not support her. And shouldn't there be at least the semblance of democracy here? I mean, it might be the first time I've agreed with the messaging coming out of that group.
It is very telling again, and it's a continuation of two things. Number one is across the entire Biden-Harris administration, they have consistently shown that they believe if they say something, that it is somehow true. And number two, that we, the American people, are stupid enough to buy what they are saying and not pay attention to what they're doing. We've seen this dramatically with their open border policies. Over and over again for the last 3 years, President Biden, Kamala Harris, Secretary Mayorkas, over and over again telling the American people, the border is secure. The border is secure. There is no crisis at the border. Don't worry about this. There's nothing to see here, folks. And then all of a sudden, because they see voters are looking at what's actually happening, they're not buying their lie. President Biden does this last-minute political election year executive order to try to crack down on the border and actually acknowledge, well, actually, no, it wasn't secure, but it's the Republicans' fault and it's Trump's fault. It doesn't make sense in any way, shape, or form. They did the same thing with our economy. Bidenomics is working great. It's one of our greatest success stories. The economy is going to be great. The recession is not going to last very long. It's just a temporary thing. Don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. Meanwhile, everyday Americans are noticing that they can afford less and less every time you go to the grocery store, recognizing that our economy is not doing very well. Everything costs more now. And when are these prices going to fall? When is inflation going to go down in enough of a way that makes it so that people can not have to be so concerned about how to cover the basic expenses of everyday life? We're seeing this same thing happen here. I think this statement from Black Lives Matter is very telling because they're speaking the truth, first of all, but second of all, also that it shows that they expect Black voters to fall in behind Kamala Harris lockstep, once again playing the identity politics game, rather than actually looking at what are the issues that are of concern to African-American voters, to different demographics and constituencies across our country. They're not actually focused on solutions to the real challenges we face, once again focused on what they say and hoping we fall for the lie, and the optics of what they're presenting that are not reflective of the truth of the world and country that we live in today.
So on the subject of the economy, I believe that this is one of the reasons Democrats are struggling so mightily. And I think it's, so far we've seen Harris as well. It's only been days, so take it with a grain of salt, with young people, because they're being directly affected. They can't get into the economy. They can't get anything close to a running start. They're dragging. They can't find jobs. I also happen to believe the over-the-top DEI messaging that these young people have grown up with and been immersed in high school and college has turned a lot of them on these Democrats. They don't want their skin color and their gender and their whatever shoved down their throats. But look at this report from CNN. I've got two sound bites here from this guy, Harry Enton, who watches the polls carefully for them. They're very interesting, Tulsi. We'll play the first one and then we'll go to the second. Watch.
Joe Biden won voters under the age of 35 by 21 points. What do we see with Kamala Harris? Well, she's still ahead, but the margin here is significantly less than what we saw with Joe Biden back in 2020. She's up by just 9 points. You may make the argument that was better than Biden was doing before he got out, but compared to that Democratic baseline, where Democrats have historically in presidential elections, at least this century, been carrying that young vote by 20 or more percentage points, she is way down from that. Democrats say they're more motivated to turn out after Biden left the race. Well, we do see a significant portion of Democrats who say yes, 39%. The thing I was interested in was it disproportionately younger voters who said that they were more likely to turn out or more motivated to turn out. And what we see here is it's 42%. Not a big difference between 42 and 39%. So this idea, again, that the vice president has unique potential to dig in and get young voters to turn out, John, it's just not there in the numbers despite all the internet memes that are going around.
They've only gotten a 3-point bump with young voters on enthusiasm since they announced her. Let me play the second one because this speaks more to party identification. And you and I both know you used to be a Democrat. I did too. Yeah. When you're young, that's when the Democrat Party is kind of usually most appealing. Not necessarily right now. Look at this.
I want to look at party identification again. Voters under the age of 35. Go back to 2020. This is the Pew Research study. This is one of the best studies that we have. And look at that. 56% of young voters said that, in fact, they were Democrats. They identified as Democrat or lean Democratic. You look down at 2024, it's 49%. Look at the Republican jump from 39 to 49%. So when we say that Harris is doing worse than Biden, it's not that she's uniquely bad. It's rather she's fighting uphill. She's trying to fight against a wave that is going against the Democrats among young voters. And Harris may be unique in some ways. Maybe she does slightly better than the generic Democrat, but not all that much.
So for the listening audience, it shows that the Republicans used to be at a significant disadvantage in getting young people to vote and register Republican, and it's been completely erased. And Democrats have gone from having 49% of the young voters registered as Democrat to just 30. They've lost 10 percentage points off their share. So you explain that one to me, Tulsi, because that's a problem for them.
You know, what I think is encouraging of what we're seeing here is that you have young people who are questioning. They're not just accepting whatever they're being fed. Again, we can't cast a broad brush and say all young people this or that, but it's encouraging to see that there are more young people who are not just accepting at face value what the Democratic leader is saying when they say, hey, a boy can become a girl simply by declaring that is so, and that boys should be allowed to compete in girls' sports. I think people are actually, this is young people, but I think across the board are recognizing the literal and pure insanity of these woke radical ideologies of the Democratic elite are not only advocating for, but pushing and mandating in our schools. The fact that in some schools now, for example, a track team in my home state of Hawaii, a girls' track team now has half of the entire team are biological males competing on a girls' team, taking away those opportunities from our young women and girls. I think every rational, open-minded person would look at this kind of example and just say, this is insanity. It's crazy. And so this, you mentioned some examples with regard to the economy. You look at examples related to our open borders and how it's not just the border states now that are feeling the effects and impacts of the almost 4 years of open border policies under the Biden-Harris administration. It's small towns, it's rural communities. I was in Montana recently and was talking to some folks there. This is Montana. You couldn't get farther away from the border on any coast or the Southwest than Montana. And even there, they are being impacted by the illegal immigration crisis and an increasing presence of criminal activity by the cartels who have taken a stronghold there. It is harder for everyday Americans, young people who are usually not attached to an affiliation of one party or another from a generational standpoint. So it's encouraging to see how people are using their common sense, being critical thinkers, being independent-minded thinkers about, okay, well, which party and which candidate is more accurately representing common sense and what is actually in the best interest of themselves, their families, their communities, and our country.
I was just talking to a couple of young people, young and in college, and they were, each one of them, 3 guys, all telling me they had furries in their high school and seeing them in college, that the kids regularly showing up wearing cat ears and tails and outfits and pretending that they were an animal during school hours. And all 3 of these young men happen to be white. They have zero question that this is a disadvantage for them in seeking job opportunities, that in interview after interview, we're going in another direction. And invariably, they hire somebody who's got some sort of identity, that the box that can be checked. I really think this is having electoral consequences for the Democrats, and it's showing up in some of these polls. And I think even they are going to realize this. I don't know whether they'll actually do anything about it, though, because they're so mind melded into this ideology. I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to come back because there's a lot more to get to. I want to get to Kamala Harris and who she is on the crime issue, because as I was pointing out, she supposedly has this tough history from California, but when she was elevated to vice president, her messaging changed dramatically, and now even her party is starting to change on the issue of crime because it's gotten so bad. And even Democrats are realizing defund police is not a good message. So what the hell is she going to do? What's she going to say? Which one's going to emerge?
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place. That impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work.
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who are on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
So that was the July 2019 debate in one of the most memorable exchanges in recent history between now presumptive Democrat nominee Kamala Harris and our guest today, Tulsi Gabbard, former U.S. representative as a Democrat and author of For Love of Country. And Tulsi's had a just very negative experience with these Democrats who are now pulling the strings around Kamala Harris too. But, we went back, even though we're friends, and we fact-checked everything you said, 100% accurate. There isn't one word of that was off. And it was pretty telling that she didn't deny it. She just tried to pivot to, I'm proud of my record. And so now she really is at a crossroads here because she's got to figure out whether she wants to be no, cash bail is a good thing, Kamala Harris, or no, we don't like cash bail because it hurts minorities, Kamala Harris, and whether she's going to be we want to prosecute marijuana users, Kamala Harris, or the one who admitted to smoking marijuana for recreation purposes on a show, right? Like, she's tried to reinvent herself so many times, and now the cultural winds have shifted such that I think she's going to be a little twisted on which way to land. What do you think?
First, I think it's important to look at how was it possible? You said that was July 2019. Kamala Harris, I think, announced her candidacy in January of 2019. How was it possible that I was the first candidate running for president at that time, and really the first person, even when you count the mainstream media, to actually call her out and question her very simply, as you pointed out, question her on her record that she said she was proud of as Attorney General. This is important to point out because it's a sign of what we should expect here for the next 3.5 months in this election, that the media is going to continue to push out fluff stories about her. They are not going to seriously and honestly examine her record. They're going to treat her with kid gloves, and even worse yet, create this new false narrative about who Kamala Harris is and to try to reshape her record. So we should be very clear-eyed about that, because as you said, what I found there, as you and your researchers probably found, it wasn't very hard to look at her record and what she's claiming to be proud of. Second of all, there's far more to look at than I had in the 60 seconds on that debate stage to bring up. Just a few. Defunding the police. I have no doubt she will say with a straight face she did not support defunding the police, but the fact is that she did. She may have called it reimagining law enforcement, but in reality, what she was advocating for, even as vice president, was to take funding away from our law enforcement and divert it elsewhere. And this has come, we've seen in cities that have actually implemented this policy and what a failure it has been and how it has made our communities in this country far less safe and increased crimes, violent crimes, and so forth, literally because they have defunded the police. You look back during her time as Attorney General, she promoted charging parents with a misdemeanor for truancy if their kids missed more than 10% of days in school. Well, and she passed this into law, and it negatively impacted so many families who, for one reason or another, maybe they had pulled their kids out and were homeschooling them, or maybe a family member got sick and they weren't able to take their kids to school for a whole number of reasons. She turned parents into criminals, charging them with misdemeanors that could result in up to a year in jail, hauling single moms out of their homes in handcuffs. This is the kind of top cop prosecutor that Kamala Harris is proud of being. We look at her time as a member of the Judiciary Committee in the U.S. Senate, where she was dismissing Article 6 of the Constitution that says there shall be no religious test, when she questioned Boucher, who was nominated by President Trump to become a judge, accusing him of being unqualified to be a judge simply because of his Catholic faith. And he was a member of the Knights of Columbus, accusing him of being part of some nefarious group and, in fact, implementing a religious test in defiance of the Constitution. There are a lot of other examples that we can give, but again, this is why it's so important that we point out her actual record. And when you have someone who doesn't believe in the rule of law, as we've seen with the Biden-Harris administration's lawfare that's been taking place, politicizing our public institutions, the Department of Justice and Judiciary and law enforcement to go after their political opponents, foremost of which is Donald Trump, but also including peaceful pro-life protesters and others who dare to challenge their agenda and their position. She wants to be the top cop and the prosecutor president, as she has claimed. We should be very concerned about that because she doesn't respect the Constitution. She is not willing to uphold the oath that she took to support and defend the Constitution. And so the lawfare that we've seen under the Biden-Harris administration, we can only assume would only get worse as she seeks to exercise her muscle in that respect. There has to be a reckoning with her record as Attorney General, as U.S. Senator, and as Vice President. And I believe that most Americans, when presented with the truth, as you pointed out in that moment in the debate, will realize how dangerous she would be if she is to be given these levers of power to abuse.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is in addition to wanting Medicare for all and to eliminate our private insurance plans, wanting to eliminate the filibuster so that she can pass the Green New Deal and take away airplanes and cars and cows. This is actually stuff she's on the record with. not to mention her abortion policies. But here she is back in June of 2020, wanting to appease a riled up Democratic base in the wake of the George Floyd situation, being pretty clear about how she felt about cops on the street. Look at this.
It is outdated and is actually wrong and backward to think that more police officers will create more safety. A big part of this conversation really is about reimagining how we do public safety in America, which I support, which is this. We have confused the idea that to achieve safety, you put more cops on the street. You know, for far too long, the status quo thinking has been to believe that by putting more police on the street, you're going to have more safety. And that's just wrong. That's not how it works.
So that's the new Kamala Harris, right? Not the old one who was a DA and a prosecutor. The new one is, we don't need more cops. Fewer cops is the way. And now here we are 4 years later. We've seen what a disaster that's been, in particular for communities of color, Tulsi. Those are the ones who got hurt the worst by that insane policy that she helped push.
You know, those clips, that string of clips you just played, really once again exposes her lack of knowledge and understanding and intelligence. To be so simplistic as to say, well, more cops doesn't lead to safer streets. Well, it's a much bigger challenge than this. My sister served in law enforcement. I have a lot of friends who are serving in local, state, county, federal law enforcement. It's about investing in our fellow Americans who make this very selfless choice to go and put their lives and well-being and safety on the line every single day to make our communities safe. It's not a matter of just mere numbers. It's about investing in them, their training and their capabilities to be able to face the kinds of extreme challenges that they do on a daily basis. It's about making sure that we have systems in place to be able to support them as they deal with these very traumatic situations, and make it so that they are in a position to be most successful, building those relationships with our communities, investing in local police officers who are serving their local communities, and making it so that they and their families have that safety and security of knowing that they're cared for. It's taking this holistic approach to this challenge that we've been dealing with law enforcement and increasingly more dangerous streets, equipping them with what they need in order to accomplish the reason why so many people become law enforcement in the first place, which is to serve and to protect.
But
that is what we should be focusing on.
She's got a record time and time again of demonizing the cops. No matter the situation, she's against the police. When Jussie Smollett came up with his nonsense story and said he was attacked and that anybody saying he wasn't was a liar, she sided with him. She came out and said this about him. One of the kindest, most gentle human beings I know. I'm praying for his quick recovery. This was an attempted modern day lynching. No one should have to fear for their life because of their sexuality or color of their skin. We must confront this hate. Again, not directly involving the police, but there was a race thing, and that's underlying these attacks on cops. Then came Jacob Blake, who attacked cops. He went after cops with a knife, and rather than waiting for the facts, and by the way, you could see the cops were under threat in the videos that first came out if you were just open-minded, she piled on the cops there. And here's what she said in August of 2020, SOT 29.
We also see pain, hurt, and destruction in the aftermath of yet another Black man shot by police. Jacob Blake shot 7 times in the back in broad daylight in front of his 3 young sons. It's sickening to watch. It's all too familiar. And it must end. But he is fighting for his life, and he shouldn't have to be. My heart goes out to the Blake family as they endure an ordeal that is tragically common in our country.
Tragically common with those terrible cops. And just to put a point on it, this is the same woman who was bailing out BLM protesters, raising money to bail them out, rioters. Here was Jacob Blake, the person she said specifically, not in that clip, she was proud of him. She's out there condemning the cops. It's all too common. for these racist cops to shoot a black man who's unarmed and not a threat. Here was Jacob Blake after the fact giving an interview on Good Morning America.
I realized I had dropped my knife. I had a little pocket knife. So I picked it up after I got off of him because they tased me and I fell on top of him.
With an open knife in hand that Blake says fell out of his pocket, he walks around the front of the vehicle towards the driver's side door. What are you thinking at that point?
I'm not really worried. I'm walking away from them, so it's not like they're gonna shoot me. I shouldn't have picked it up.
Right. She never apologized to the cops involved in the Jacob Blake situation. She never owned up to her lies about Jussie Smollett. She's anti-cop now because that's what serves her best politically.
We shouldn't be surprised to hear how that story changes here in the next few months as she recognizes how much of our country truly values all that our law enforcement do every day. I think this is going to be one issue of many where, like what happened on the 2020 campaign, she will come up with whatever she feels she needs to say in order to try to win this election in November. I think even back in 2020, it got to a point where her changing message and narrative really occurred like from Monday to Tuesday. You're not talking about a years-long shift in her belief and position on a specific issue. Her positions on many of the issues that we've talked about today flip-flopped so many times within the course of a week. Even the New York Times and the Washington Post were forced to call her out for this, saying that, well, we don't actually even know what Kamala Harris is advocating for. This is very likely going to continue to happen here, and we need to call her out for it every time because her record speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the underlying left wing, obviously, far left progressive California native is going to take a beating on actual policies. I made reference to outside of law enforcement, some of the far left things she's pushed. This is coming up already. And this ad, our first panel mentioned it. We have it. It's out of Pennsylvania, where the Senate candidate McCormick is running this against Bob Casey, who is the Democrat. Democrat is Casey. Dave McCormick is the Republican. Casey's a 3-term incumbent. And it's a Senate race there. Casey's ahead by 6 points out there. It's easier when you're the incumbent, but he just endorsed Kamala Harris. And Pennsylvania, of course, is ground zero in this presidential contest as well. So we're watching the Senate or we're watching the presidential contest. And take a look at this ad, which is already generating a lot of attention online.
Kamala Harris is inspiring and very capable. The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
The nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
What is the solution for voters in the fossil fuel industry?
Giving the workers an ability to transition. We're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct.
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation.
Abolish ICE. Yeah. Is that a position you agree with?
And we need to probably think about starting from scratch. Outdated, it is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What would people
Yes.
to reduce red meat specifically?
Yes.
People who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
So for people out there who like their insurance, well, they don't get to keep it.
Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on. I am opposed to any policy that would deny any human being public health, period.
The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
I mean, that is just devastating. Those are her actual positions. Those are her actual words.
That's a very compelling montage of Kamala Harris, the real Kamala Harris that people should be paying attention to. These same policies that she's talking about in that montage of ads are exactly what we've seen, quite frankly, reflected in the Biden-Harris administration of the last 3.5 years. As hard as she tries to perhaps run away from some of these positions that she has very clearly taken for years in the past and that have been shown through and reflected in the Biden-Harris administration. The most important thing is for voters to not fall for it. I think that's a very powerful ad that represents who Kamala Harris is, and frankly represents the positions of the Democrat elite, the power elite, who have been pulling the strings and calling the shots throughout this administration, and what their goals and objectives are. Those who she will follow their orders and be beholden to as she becomes the Democratic nominee, and if she is allowed to become president of the United States.
It's really crazy to hear her say she wants to ban fossil fuels. She wants to ban fracking. We know she also wants to ban nuclear power. She wants to do it all with windmills and solar power. Meanwhile, there was just a disaster with the windmills in Nantucket, where one of these windmills came down and all of its toxicity is pumping into the ocean to the point where on the nearby beaches, they're having to wear hazmat suits now to clean up some of the shards of this thing. And that's their answer to everything. There's absolutely no care for the environmental consequences of, these new toxic fangled things like the windmills, like the solar panels, and how much digging they have to do, and not to mention the electric car batteries, right? It's all just something that makes them feel better about green energy, and the consequences to the actual earth be damned. That's just one of the many things that I hope to hear more on in the coming days, and we will actually be reporting more on that windmill disaster.
On this, Megyn, I was on a long flight yesterday and was talking with one of the flight attendants, and she brought up politics and what's going on and the breaking news. And really for her, one of the main takeaways I had from the conversation was she said, look, I care about having clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. I just don't want to drive an electric vehicle. I want to be able to drive the car or truck that I choose to. And I thought it was such an important statement that she made, because it really cuts to the heart of the dichotomy and the huge contrast between what we're seeing coming from today's Democrat Party and the Democrat elite versus what we're seeing coming from President Trump and largely the Republican Party of today. The Democrat elite wanting to take away our right to individual liberty, our freedom to make these choices for ourselves. If you want to drive an electric vehicle, you should be able to do so. If you don't want to drive an electric vehicle, you want to drive a Ford F-150, you should be able to do so. And that really is the thing here that I think most Americans will recognize is we don't want the government to force us to eat what they tell us to eat or to drive whatever they tell us to drive. When it comes down to the choices that we make for ourselves and our families, we should have the freedom to make those choices. And that, to me, it comes down to freedom. It comes down to liberty, and one of very limited government, going back to what our founders envisioned for us at a federal level, decentralization, valuing our individual liberty and freedom of choice, versus the Democrats who believe in big brother, big government. They know what is better for us than we do for ourselves. And so they will take away our right to make those individual choices. And that is what is most dangerous about what today's Democrat Party and Kamala Harris represent and what their goals and objectives are.
Coming up, Marco Rubio, Marty Makary, Kristi Noem, and more. Let's be honest. The world is not getting any simpler. Whether it's a natural disaster, a supply chain issue, or just a nasty virus, things happen that we cannot control. But what we can control is how prepared we are. And we have seen time and time again that preparation is key. It is about being proactive, not reactive. And this is where the Jace case comes in. The Jace case is an emergency kit with prescription antibiotics. Is such a good idea that cover a huge range of common infections. The Jace case, J-A-S-E, takes the guesswork and the panic out of challenging situations. You will have the right medication when you need it, where you need it. In times of uncertainty, you don't want to be dependent on outside systems. With the Jace case, you have a practical, reliable solution right at your fingertips. It's about taking control in a world that sometimes feels out of it. So don't wait until it's too late. Get prepared now. Go to jace.com and enter MK at checkout. That's promo code MK at jace.com to get the right meds the moment you need them. This is about smart preparation for your peace of mind and that of your family. One of the appointments I'm most excited about is Marty Makary. Now, he is a Johns Hopkins surgical oncologist. I mean, you don't get more accomplished than that. And he's been appointed by Trump to take over at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. This thing has been deeply problematic in keeping you sick. Go watch Dope Sick. Go pay any attention to what RFKJ has been saying, the revolving door, the conflicts of interest, and just the ridiculousness that organization has been pushing on us for far too long on what's allegedly healthy and what's not, what's allegedly good for us and our kids and what's not. Marty Makary is one of the ones who saw through the COVID nonsense very early. And one of the other reasons I love him is because he recently wrote a book that's perfectly in line with the Maha philosophy, RFKJ and Callie Means and Casey Means and these others. And, he came to this on his own, given his expertise. He was on recently to promote it. It's called Blind Spots, When Medicine Gets It Wrong. And just the name of it is encouraging, is it not? Anyway, I love this guy. I think you will too. Dr. Marty Makary for FDA. Let's talk about, first of all, why you thought this was necessary.
Well, groupthink is a powerful force. And in medicine, we get sort of medical dogma that takes on a life of its own, and it permeates. And what we develop are these giant blind spots, these areas of medicine and health that affect every aspect of everything we're doing, of every person's health, but we never talk about them. The microbiome, the poison food supply, the toxins we're exposed to, the bad recommendations that we put out there, the fact that some of our modern day health crises have been caused by the hubris of the medical establishment. We said opioids were not addictive, igniting the opioid epidemic.
Yes.
We said we gave the wrong advice on peanut allergies, igniting the modern day peanut allergy epidemic. So when we use good science in medicine, we can help a lot of people. But when we use the opinions of a small group of leaders and central planners in medicine, where they issue these broad edicts, we have a lousy track record. Food pyramid, the opioid epidemic, the obesity epidemic. So we've got to take a step back and actually ask, why is cancer doubling in many areas of GI cancer? My area of pancreas, I'm a pancreas specialist at Hopkins. We do more pancreatic care and pancreas cancer than any hospital in America. Never at any point in my 20 plus years there did anyone ever stop and say, why has pancreas cancer doubled in the last 20 years? Now, they're all good people. They're my friends. They're great doctors. But we have done this terrible thing to doctors. We've put them on this warpath where all they do is put out fires at the end stage. No one's asking the big questions. No one's asking, why has autism been going up 14% each year for the last 23 years? Why are half our nation's children obese or overweight? Why are nearly a quarter of them dealing with fatty liver and pre-diabetes? I mean, this is a well-being issue for the country. It's a national security issue. It is a issue of the economy. This entire over-medicated population is a massive burden. I mean, a $4.7 trillion economy that's expanding like crazy. And we're sort of told by the politicians, oh, we were able to get Medicare to negotiate drug prices and save $6 billion in the first year. Okay, that's great, but that's a drop in the ocean. We've got this much bigger blind spot in modern medicine.
So why is it like this? Is it all because of the power of big pharma to line its own pockets and get people to go along with it?
Pharma controls the narrative. They've captured the big health agencies. They've created this culture. First of all, it's very hard to do research unless big pharma is paying for it or the NIH has a designated center. So who at the NIH is interested in the fact that sperm counts have gone down 50% in the last 5 decades, or that the average age of puberty is going down each year, or that kids feel sick more and more, that autoimmune diseases are going up, that attention deficit disorder is now epidemic, or 40% of our kids will have a mental health diagnosis? Who at the NIH is going to study the microbiome, pesticides, heavy metals, the poison food supply, these food additives that are engineered to be addictive? So when you eat them, your appetite increases, even though you kind of feel full. And what's happening is all these foreign molecules, these chemicals that are now rampant, including the derivatives of seed oils, they go down the GI tract, which has a lymphatic system, an immune system in the wall of the intestine. And it's not reacting to these foreign molecules and chemicals with a sudden reaction. It's reacting with a low-level immune fighting of this stuff. And it makes you feel blah, makes you feel sick and sad sometimes. And what are we doing? We have told doctors, you only have your medications to do and your operations to do. We haven't given doctors the time or resources or research funding to deal with the root causes. And so they've lived in these blind spots. We never talk about them. We never talk about these issues at the top medical centers. Trust me, I've gone as far as you can go in academic medicine. All the accolades and tenure, and no one is talking about the biggest issues in health because of these blind spots. I think we've got good people working in a bad system where the culture has said, put your head down, do your job, you'll be rewarded. You'll make back all this debt that you got in medical school. By the way, we take these highly creative students out of college. They want to save the world, have big ideas. They're altruistic. Heck, 90% of our applicants or so want to do medical missions, if not full-time, part-time as a side of their practice. And we take these bright, creative young folks and we beat them down with this old guard dinosaur curriculum. Memorize and regurgitate, memorize these thousands of drugs and learn to get an eye, a hawk eye for when you can use them. And, oh, there's an indication. Here you go. There's an indication. Here you go. We put them on this treadmill where they have 10-minute visits, 15-minute visits, and they're just diagnosing and treating and doling out diagnoses and meds. We've done a terrible thing to these doctors, to these young folks.
It's depressing. Like, I went to my eye doctor the other day, and the eye doctor's great, but I could see the schedule, like I needed a follow-up, and I could see they pulled up the schedule. I mean, this person was double booked every day, all day, for every 10-minute interval for weeks. I thought, how much care can they be giving each of these patients?
It's a crazy hamster wheel, and I was on it, and I got off of it. I said, I'm going to focus on my passion, which is public health research. I had a degree in public health in medical school that I got basically walked away from medicine after 3 years of medical school, disillusioned. This isn't for me. What are we doing? And I enrolled in graduate school for public health. I ended up coming back to medicine. I missed the bedside care, and I love being a surgeon. But after being on this treadmill that everybody gets on, I said, no more dangling bonuses at the end of the year. I don't care what my throughput is. The system is designed for throughput and billing and coding. Why do you think we have 35% of doctors burn out, and doctors are one of the highest professions for suicide? We're doing a terrible thing to these people. And a lot of doctors now are rejecting it. They're saying, we're not going to have anything to do with this. Half of my students at Johns Hopkins don't want to have anything to do with this crazy broken system. They don't care about the big pay and the house in the suburb. They want to be a part of something bigger. They want to deal with the root causes. They want to start businesses. They're entrepreneurial. They're getting second degrees. They want to spend time in a Medicare Advantage model where basically they get paid on a lump sum for a population. They can spend an hour and talk about the sleep quality of a person that affects their blood pressure, not just doling out antihypertensives. Maybe we need to talk about school lunch programs instead of putting every kid on Ozempic. Maybe we need to talk about treating diabetes with cooking classes instead of throwing insulin at people. Maybe we need to talk about environmental exposures that cause cancer, not just the chemotherapy to treat it. We're going backwards. We're watching all of these chronic diseases consume our culture, and you've got to get off this myopic focus. So luckily, good stuff is happening. A lot of doctors are speaking up. They're getting off the treadmill. They're spending time with patients. They're coming up with their own models for care, financial models. And a bunch of us docs are going directly to the public to educate them about health.
Yes, it's so revolutionary, and it's brave because these are very big, powerful forces that have a financial interest, frankly, in keeping us sick, who don't really want to see this. The nutrition aspect of it is huge. and it's almost never discussed at a medical visit. They might say you're obese, you're overweight, you need to lose weight, but actually, the stuff about, we talked before the show about Casey Means and her new book, the stuff about, seed oils that you mentioned, the stuff about preservatives and the toxins in our food, the poisoning of the food supplies you point out, all this, herbicide or whatever, insecticide all over our fruit and our vegetables that some people don't even know to really seriously wash off, never mind not buy if you can. Not to mention microplastics in the air and the water and our furniture, and then the, fire repellents on our rugs. And it's just a toxic world. A lot of people don't even know about it. And frankly, just me listing it, they're like, I can't, I'm out. I got other things to deal with. I can't deal with all that.
Like, a bunch of us are trying to give a different perspective than the perspective the food industry and big ag and pharma have been putting in front of people for a long time. Telling doctors, no, you don't need to look into arsenic levels in the water. The EPA says you can have up to 10 micrograms per liter of arsenic in your water. Where did they come up with that number from?
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
They're making stuff up. This is where we get into trouble. This is why distrust goes down in the establishment. So you draw the blood of a baby today through the umbilical cord, and there's 287 forever compounds. How about research on those compounds? How about research on the seed oil derivatives? How about research on the pesticides that have hormone effects in children, which may explain the declining fertility and lowering age of puberty, instead of research on bat coronaviruses in Wuhan and Japanese quail that they give cocaine to and they watch their sexual activity. These are real studies funded by the government. So we have had terrible leaders in the medical establishment. And so a bunch of us, Peter Attia, Casey and Kelly Means, Vinay Prasad, Zubin Damani, we feel like now we're going to go directly to the public and educate them about the real story on health, because there is a huge body of literature on all these topics you talk about, from microplastics to the microbiome. And people need to know about it so they can make better choices every day.
That's one benefit of COVID, is it did expose our medical leaders as agenda-driven and in many cases not trustworthy, like Fauci and the NIH. And we learned to try to do an end around, to find the doctors who we actually trusted. You were chief among them. I know you worked with
best.
Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who we love, and we were the first, I think, to put him on. When he and his colleagues wrote their paper, the Great Barrington Declaration, talking about focused protection. So, and Vinay Prasad has been amazing. I've watched all of his stuff on myocarditis for young people, because I have 3 kids. We did not get them the COVID vaccine, and I'm thrilled we didn't. I wish I could say the same for myself. But anyway, I think it was a good lesson for us in question everyone, to find end arounds in the same way media, right? Question everything. Find the people you trust as opposed to entire establishments.
Yeah, we don't want to create cynicism or hysteria. If you have an emergency, do whatever the doctor says. But when it comes to chronic diseases, when it comes to irritable bowel or why somebody is developing autoimmune disease, we don't really ever talk about this stuff in medicine. You mentioned food and nutrition. I gave the keynote speech. I was invited to give the keynote speech several years ago at the Big Nutrition Conference. This is the biggest conference on nutrition. And
for doctors?
For dietitians, for nutritionists and dietitians. And so I gave my keynote speech. Of course, I like to push the field, as you've observed. And afterwards, a woman who is from the milk lobby comes and gives me her perspective when I talked about why are we taking out natural fat and adding sugar? Like, what are we doing? And we're doing it backwards. Like, there's nothing wrong with natural fat. It doesn't cause heart disease like we thought. And she says they're one of the 2 big sponsors of the nutrition conference. The other sponsor, I find out, is Coca-Cola.
Oh, come on.
So this is people are not getting the real story on health.
Up next, Senator Marco Rubio, soon to be, we believe, Secretary of State. The October 15th deadline has come and gone. Are you prepared for what's coming? It's scary. Let's do scary, and then we'll do the better part. Do you owe back taxes? Are your tax returns still unfiled? Have you missed the deadline to file for an extension? Now that October 15th has come and gone, the IRS may be ramping up enforcement. It's scary stuff. You could face wage garnishments. You could face frozen bank accounts. You could face property seizures if you have not taken action. But here is the hopeful part. Tax Network USA has helped taxpayers save over $1 billion in tax debt and has filed over 10,000 tax returns. These guys specialize in helping people reduce their tax burdens. So visit tnusa.com/Megyn or just call 1-800-958-1000 for a free consultation. Their experts will walk you through a few simple questions to see how much you could save. Give it a try now before the IRS takes more aggressive steps. Take control and visit tnusa.com/Megyn or call 1-800-958-1000. Senator Marco Rubio might be seen as the most mainstream pick that Donald Trump has made in a very key role as Secretary of State. His confirmation should be an absolute breeze. You already have some Democrats saying that they'll vote for him. Senator Rubio joined me back in January of 2022. It was episode 241 to talk about the divisive rhetoric coming from President Biden and the Dems and their failures when it came to the economy. With inflation now at record high in 40 years, right? And the supply chain crisis is not over, not by a long shot. Have you tried to buy a dishwasher lately? My goodness, good luck. Literally, we were told we had to wait a year. I mean, like, okay. He's decided to focus on voting rights. Build Back Better fell apart. He couldn't get it through. And now his switch is to voting rights, which helps the American people right now in their, kitchen sort of table issues. I don't know. But I want to give you a flavor and get you to react to how he's describing the stakes, why he says he's so focused on this right now. Here's a compilation of a speech he gave in Georgia on Tuesday. Listen.
Today, we come to Atlanta, the cradle of civil rights, to make clear what must come after that dreadful day when a dagger was literally held at the throat of American democracy. They want chaos to reign. We want the people to rule. Jim Crow 2.0 is about two insidious things: voter suppression and election subversion. At consequential moments in history, they present a choice. Do you want to be on the side of Dr. King or George Wallace? Do you want to be on the side of John Lewis or Bull Connor? Do you want to be on the side of Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis?
Well, there you have it, Senator. I guess he would say you're on the side of Jefferson Davis and Bull Connor because this is about his voting rights proposal, which essentially seeks to federalize elections, but he would say it seeks to make them more fair and protect voter rights. Your thoughts on his comments?
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack here. The first thing I would say is that even some Democrats were sort of embarrassed by, you see that in some of their statements, a little bit embarrassed by how far the speech went, almost overcompensating, I guess, for the failures and things of that nature. So that kind of hyperbole actually backfires because people look at it and shake their heads. I would tell you that most of the people I've talked to on real earth, not Washington bubble, didn't even know that speech happened. Didn't even know that this was happening. Doesn't make it unimportant because they're trying to change the election law and have a federal takeover. But I think your point is the number one issue. Like if you went and asked people in this country, what are the top 10 things on your mind? This wouldn't even be on the top 50 because it's easier than ever to vote in America. It just simply is. And the numbers bear that out. So there's two things at play here. I think the first is a desire for power. They certainly view this as the perfect issue in which to break the filibuster. If there is no Senate filibuster, they not only can pass this voting bill, they can pack the Supreme Court, they can make DC a state. There's all kinds of things that they could do if there were no filibuster. And so number one, it's about that. And I think number two, frankly, is about politics. I think Chuck Schumer's afraid to get primaried in New York. AOC has not ruled out running for Senate against him. I think a lot of Democrats, but particularly Chuck Schumer in a state like New York, see that over the last few years, you've had longtime incumbents taken out by people from the far left, and they're concerned about it. Maybe he thinks he's still going to win, but doesn't want to go through that process. There's a tremendous amount of pressure coming from the base of the party, particularly radical elements of the base. And this month just happens to be the turn of those who are out there saying, that there's some sort of, as he called it, Jim Crow 2.0, which is absurd. And most Americans will tell you is absurd.
Can I ask you about politics? Because to me, the politics of this whole voting rights thing has not made any sense. Now, I am just a journalist, so I don't totally get it. But it was clear that he did not have the votes to get rid of the filibuster, either for a limited purpose, like he says, just to get the voting rights law through, or on a wider basis. And it was pretty clear he might not even have the votes for the voting rights legislation itself.
Right.
And yet he's running around saying, we're doing it, giving speeches. Chuck Schumer saying, I'm bringing it to a vote. It's happening. And then, of course, Kyrsten Sinema, this week is like, no, yeah, it's not happening. I'm not supporting you, a Democrat. Right. So they don't have the votes. They knew they didn't have the votes. So why were they making such a thing? It's like they did the same thing with Build Back Better. Like, we're going to do it. We've got it. And like, Manchin was never on board. Why do they keep embarrassing themselves? This is an easy thing to avoid.
Yeah, there's a pattern in politics. So what happens is you win an election, you have a 50-50 Senate, a very narrow majority in the House, but your base, the most radical elements, the people who give you $50 a month online, who knock on doors, who make the phone calls, who, if they're not energized, you have no chance of winning elections. Those people think we have a mandate. And they say, okay, you won. It doesn't matter if you won by 1 vote, 1 point, or you won by 20. You won. And now we expect you to do all the things you promised. And so they go out there and they try to do these things, and they're not going to pass. But they're angry at them, and they're saying, well, at least try. You have to at least try. It happens in politics. It happens to both sides in some cases. You're not going to win something, but if you don't at least show you're fighting, then your base gets really angry at you. Then they get turned off. They won't show up. They won't give money, and you get destroyed because you can't win an election these days if your base is not energized. So that's what this is about. It's not just about Chuck Schumer personally. Think about how selfish this is. This he thinks may help fend off a primary challenge, but he has all these Democrats running in states that are somewhat vulnerable, and they're being put on the spot on this thing, and they're going to have to go out there now and take positions on it, and dividing his own conference over that. But it's all a base play because they have to be able to go to the base and say, we tried, we fought, but these two guys over here and the racist Republicans wouldn't let us move forward. And that's what this is. It's as simple as that.
They say, and I want to get to the accusations of racism because they're coming in by the minute against Kyrsten Sinema now and others. But they say, look, we have to have this new voting rights law because of January 6th, because the Republicans are trying to change laws across the nation to make it easier for the vote to be thrown out. And January 6th proved that, we need more federal control of how these things get certified and go down. There was a moment where you tried to address that rationale. We cut the soundbite because we found it kind of interesting. This is soundbite 5. I'm going to play it and then get you to add to it.
I think almost everyone would tell you that what happened on January 6th here was a terrible thing. It should never have happened, and it should never happen again. But I don't care how many candlelight vigils and musical performances you have from the cast of Hamilton. You're not going to convince at least most normal and sane people that our government last year was almost overthrown by a guy wearing a Viking hat and Speedos.
Okay. Well, they've issued their first arrest for a guy charged with, quote, sedition now. Does that change your opinion?
No, my opinion is that what happened on January 6th was a terrible thing. Crimes were committed on that day, and the people that are responsible for that should be charged, should be put on trial, and if convicted, should serve sentences for it. And I continue to believe that. I believed it from the moment it started. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your banner is. I don't care whose side you're on, who you voted for, whether you agree with me on issues or not. You can't do what happened on that day. You can't do it in the Capitol, and you can't do it in the 700 different riots that took place in the summer of 2020 across this country. You cannot do it. And those are crimes. They need to be prosecuted, and people need to be put on trial and hopefully convicted for it. That is separate from the argument that somehow this was an orchestrated effort to overthrow the government of the United States of America. That just is not true. We were nowhere close to that. That was not going to happen. And so I think what happens is when you exaggerate these things, you lose credibility. When you lose credibility, then we lose the ability to analyze these things for what they truly are. And in many cases, you sort of empower the worst elements. If you go around calling, if everyone is a racist, if that becomes just a throwaway line, then you really can't call out the people that are racist or that are doing things that are race-based as a result of it. And it's the same thing with this. What happened that day, you don't have to be, and most people on normal people are able to say what happened on the day was wrong and it shouldn't have happened. But it also isn't equivalent to Pearl Harbor, where the U.S. was pulled into a world war that ended up killing 3% of the global population. These are stupid things for people to say, particularly a vice president of the United States as an example.
Yeah. And that's how she opened her remarks the other day. I mean, comparing it to 9/11 too. It's like so disrespectful, I think. The Democrats, though, continue, and the press helps, trying to call the senators, the lawmakers, anyone who's not in favor of the voting rights bill or eliminating the filibuster, which is very controversial, or that Build Back Better plan, which of course is just a laundry list of Democratic wish list items, bigots. This is a sample we have from MSNBC. They're going after Joe Manchin and some others because, of course, Manchin stopped Build Back Better. He's also reportedly not in favor of eliminating the filibuster, something Joe Biden opposed for almost his entire career until he became the president. And Kristi Noem is taking her fair shot of these accusations as well. This is Soundbite 9.
But if Chris Coons, John Tester, Mark Kelly, Kyrsten Sinema, and Joe Manchin want to be on the side of George Wallace, want to be on the side of Strom Thurmond and many others who stood in the way of civil rights, even Strom Thurmond came around on voting rights, but if they want to go down in history as standing on the side of segregationists and those individuals who oppose people who look like me having free and fair access to the ballot, then we will remember them as such.
All right, so a clip from CNN. And here to add to that, Senator, New York Democrat Representative Jamal Bowman today sharing his views of Kyrsten Sinema on Twitter, retweeting a picture of her and the late John Lewis, former congressman. In the original image, Senator Sinema had tweeted, "My hero," after Lewis died. Bowman tweets out the following: "Hero, a person who is admired or idealized for coverage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. Traitor, a person who betrays a friend, country, principle, etc." He went on to say, John Lewis is a hero. You, Sinema, are a traitor to his legacy, your constituents, and our democracy. What do you make of it?
Well, I make of it two things. Number one, if you want to get noticed in American politics today, you say things like that, right? And the more outrageous, the more notice you're going to get. And there are some people that are going to applaud it, and at least treat it as a serious statement. I think the other is that it's poisonous and toxic and nasty. And I don't even have the words to describe how ridiculous that assumption is. But it goes back to the point I made earlier, and that is this now, things like traitor, things like racist, things like bigot have become throwaway lines. Look, there are bigots and there are racists in this country. There are bigots and there are racists on the entire planet Earth. It is one of the sins that bedevils mankind. And we should reserve our anger for the ones that are really that and are motivated by that. But when you start calling everybody that and every issue becomes on the basis of that, then suddenly that issue, you can no longer raise it. You in essence, you almost give cover to the people that are actually racists and bigots. And again, look, I think that this sort of language that we just described, it plays really well among a certain core constituency that watches, CNN or MSNBC or lives on Twitter and gives money to their campaigns. But to the overwhelming majority of Americans, particularly the ones that are paying attention, because most people aren't, they would look at that and say, this is a bridge too far. I think sometimes we forget that the common sense of real people is still there, even if the people running the country sometimes seem to be out of their minds.
I want to get to quite a few other things with you, including Biden's 33% approval rating and what happened at the Supreme Court. We now have a decision on the vaccine mandates. But first, can I ask you quickly, speaking of bigotry, as we all know, the Chinese are engaged in an ethnic genocide against the Muslim minorities within China. And you've been taking the lead in trying to push for some accountability on this as we're on the precipice of the Beijing Olympics. One of the things that jumped out at me as I'm preparing for this interview, you are asking for Olympic partners to acknowledge this genocide. You did that back in December, penning a letter to these Olympic sponsors, calling them out for what you say is ignoring an ongoing genocide. I looked at the list. I cannot believe companies like Coca-Cola is so busy over here lecturing us on how terrible we all are, and yet they are a sponsor of these Olympics?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Nike, others that are out there, I'm not sure if Nike's a sponsor, but I'm sure they'll be very involved in advertising around it because of the athletes that are performing. And what happens with these companies is they are very quick to order, call for the boycott of a state, put up billboards and run commercials about how terrible the United States of America is, or how terrible some decision that was made by elected representatives of the American people are. But they won't say a word about China. And it's not just about the Olympics. It is in general. I mean, this is just true all the way across the board. And that kind of hypocrisy needs to be called out. I doubt you'll see any of these companies step forward. because if they do, the Chinese will shut them down, and that would cost them billions of dollars and maybe get the CEO fired as a result of it. So I don't have a lot of hope we're going to get a response from them, but I think it's important to continue to call out this hypocrisy.
Coming up, part of my conversation with Kristi Noem. You know how much my family and I love our dogs, right? Yes, even Strudwick, who ate all of Yardley's backpack, including her little emergency kit yesterday. Still love him. He's a challenge. He's a lot, but we love him. Cannot imagine life without them. Sometimes I do, but I don't actually want to get rid of them, usually. The point is, we love our dogs. And we're lucky to have them. We are. Okay, but I'm going to get myself together because I've got to make it through this ad. And this is the truth. Some dogs are not so lucky. This is why the people at Delta Rescue have my respect and why we love them so much. Delta Rescue is the largest no-kill care for life animal sanctuary in the world. They've rescued thousands of dogs, plus cats and horses too. They provide all of their animals, look at this sweet little guy, with shelter, safety, and most of all, with love. And they've been doing it now for more than 45 years. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions to do this, and giving can bring tax benefits to you too. So speak with your estate planner about how you can grow your estate while helping animals in need. Now we're back to Strudwick, and I'm laughing because I'm not going to give him away. He's not going to Delta Rescue. But when I tell you the dog's a handful, I mean, remember the time he ate my daughter's friend's diabetes medication? He will stop at nothing, my friends. When you get a dog, make sure you try to train him. We did try. It's just some dogs are not trainable, and they still need love and a home. So check out the deltarescue.org website today. Thank you, Delta. We appreciate your support of the show and of these sweet animals. deltarescue.org. Well, we were pretty critical of Kristi Noem's new book that was out earlier this year, in which she talks lovingly about shooting her puppy in the face. But now she is slated to be the next Homeland Security Secretary. And FYI, she had a different book out 2 years ago. And we were actually super supportive of that one. We had her on for a great conversation in episode 346 here about her faith, her family, and the promise of America. So one of the things that you learned growing up in South Dakota was the importance of faith. And you write that if the church doors were open, your family was there. And so you grew up an observant Christian, and I understand, continue to have that faith in your life. So I'm going to guess that the two religious freedom cases just decided by the U.S. Supreme Court were welcome in your view. There was one saying public funds given to students in Maine who needed to find schooling could be used on schools that provided religious education. And then the big one came out on Monday involving Coach Kennedy, who we actually had on this program not long ago, who just wanted to pray at the 50-yard line after the games and didn't say anybody else had to come join him. But a lot of the students were faithful as well and went and did it. And the school fired him. They fired him. And the Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision said, no, you violated his free speech rights and you violated his religious freedom rights, saying in part in a decision written by Justice Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, learning how to tolerate speech or prayer of all kinds is part of learning how to live in a pluralistic society, a trait of character essential to a tolerant citizenry, and went on to say respect for religious expressions is indispensable to life in a free and diverse republic. How about that?
It's a powerful statement. I love that opinion that he brought forward, just because it's the clarity that we need in this country right now of what was guaranteed by us in the United States of America. So those decisions were very, very important. And we have a lot of people that get confused about the role of faith and government and faith and schools and how that interaction happens. And in fact, even in South Dakota this year, I brought a bill that would have put a moment of silence into a school day. It would have been a moment every day where a student had an opportunity to have either a prayer if they wanted to, pray to whoever they would like to, or a moment of silence or just a quiet time. But it was to clearly draw a line in the sand that praying is allowed in our schools, that it is facilitated, that every teacher, every administrator, every person in the state would know that that is something that you have a right to do. And it was killed by Republicans. That bill was killed by Republicans because they did not feel it would be something that the school should have to worry about. They didn't want the controversy of it. And so this type of decision brings clarity to so many people about the fact that faith is to be protected from the government. It's not to protect our government from our faith and our religion. That this is one thing that people could use some direction from. And I'm so thankful for the Supreme Court making a decision that truly sends that message to the country. Yes, and I appreciate your effort to do that, because we are in a situation now as mothers, as people who have kids in the school system, where our kids you're not even allowed to mention God or religion unless it's in a way that's disparaging. That'll pass. Right. And yet we're called bigots if we object to, the LGBTQ pride parade with kink being shoved down our faces left and right. So we don't want our kids to see that. But if we try to mention anything about God, especially in the school setting, even if it's neutral, you're doing a moment of silence where you can think about God or just meditative about your life and its meaning, that's not allowed. Yeah. Well, it was interesting because many of these Republicans said, well, this isn't a problem in South Dakota yet. And I thought, why do we have to constantly? It has been an issue now since legislative session got out in a couple of school districts. And what's interesting to me is as leaders, you should lead, be clear and bring clarity when you can, especially in our school districts, which right now are kind of a war zone for people that have other agendas and other opinions and trying to indoctrinate certain beliefs on our children. So it's interesting to me, the people that get confused on religion in schools and government. I'm hopeful that we can bring more clarity with decisions like this so that in our schools, our kids feel the freedom that if they want to stop for a minute by their locker and have a quick prayer with a friend, they can do that. That's what this country is all about. Mm-hmm. What do you, when I hear you talking about taking on your own party and so on, I mean, of course, I've got to ask you what everybody wants to know, which is, well, does that mean there could be higher aspirations for you politically? Could you potentially do that on the national level, either as a Republican presidential candidate in 2024 or potentially as a running mate to a man we all know very well? He used to run a real estate business and he was president from 2016 to 2020. I honestly don't know. That's, people ask it a lot. So obviously I've had to think about it a bit, but it's just not something that's in my plans. I'm running for re-election this year in South Dakota. I'm hoping the people will trust me to lead for another 4 years as governor. Beyond that, I think anybody who's making plans just maybe doesn't understand the volatility of this political environment that we're in. And I'm always a little leery, Megyn, of people who dream of being president of the United States. I think these people that grow up and plan it for years and years probably should never be president of the United States. They more than likely want to do it for the wrong reasons. I think it's probably time in this country we have a reluctant president again, because those are the ones that truly take the job seriously, recognize the challenges of it. And the reality is we start looking at the Republican primary, there's probably going to be 48 different people running in that primary. There's a lot of people who are saying they want to be president of the United States. I'm just not convinced that it has to be me. Well, especially if Trump doesn't run. If Trump runs, a lot of people will decide not to do it. But if he doesn't run, it's going to be a wide open field. And if he does run, it seems pretty clear he's not running with Mike Pence. And then there will be a new spot open for somebody else. Somebody who perhaps I know they called you the female Trump. So it could be you. He, I dearly love the guy. He let me do my job as governor, and he helped me. When I was in Congress with tax reform, he was passionate and truly did some big things in this country. So I appreciate his policies and what he did. I'd love to have him back, especially compared to who we have in the White House today. The fact is right now, I don't think anybody can beat him in a primary. So if he does run, he's going to have to figure out how he wins a general election. And I think the way to do that, because right now it would be difficult, it'd be a challenge. I think he has got to put together a team that gives people confidence in the fact that he's got the right people together that are going to fix the country, right the ship. He's got to announce who his attorney general would be. During that campaign, he'd have to say who his secretary of state would be, who his vice president would be. That would be something that would reassure and unite a lot of Republicans. I think Republicans really got to get it together and grow up a little bit too, because they're all just trying to pretend that he's not going to run or hope for it and make no plans. We've got to figure out, how do we put a strategy together to really win, because our country's counting on it more than ever.
Yeah. And it's dicey with Trump, right? It's like he's obviously got a huge swath of support in the Republican Party, but he's also such a divisive figure that cuts both ways. I don't, for me as a journalist, it's easy because I get to watch and report on it and eat the popcorn while you guys duke it out. But I know it's for people who are diehard Republicans, they worry, and the Democrats, and we're worried about our country too. I mean, 4 more years of Biden, I'm not sure if it keeps going in this direction, what's going to be left. All right, let me shift gears, because enough about politics. I want to talk about you and the Snow Queen. How did that happen? The year was 1990. Is that the year? I want to talk about the perm.
Talk about? Oh my goodness.
Yes, I do. I'm a shallow person.
No,
I love the big hair.
Pretty successful. I'm sure people don't know that much. Oh, yep, there we are. Wow.
This is from your book. Yes. What year was this?
So that was 1990 in South Dakota, especially back then. And when you were a senior in high school, most of the girls competed in the Snow Queen contest, which really was a local area contest where you gave interviews and speeches. And they chose one to go on to the state competition. And through that, you got scholarships. At that time, they gave a car. Other items, and then you traveled throughout the Midwest or the country being an ambassador for your state to different festivals and different gatherings or whatever. So I did that with all my friends when I was a senior in high school, won the local contest, and then went to the state contest with 52 other young women. And very interesting experience, because I'm, if you remember, I was a ranch girl, a farm. In fact, when I won the state competition, the headline on all the newspapers was "Farm Girl Wins Snow Queen." It was like everybody that thought, wow, this is different. So, but it was very good for me. It's interesting. You go back that far, and to know that much about my state, travel and get to be an ambassador for it, it really was a great opportunity for me to.
Well, a new car doesn't suck either.
Oh no, the new car, you would have loved it. It was a black Trans Am with the sunroof, but on the side of it, it had huge gold letters that said 1990 South Dakota Snow Queen on it.
No
and that's
way.
The car I took to college. So you can imagine me pulling onto campus with this car that had big gold lettering on it. It was fantastic. And I was in the dorm with the entire football team. So, I didn't get any teasing whatsoever.
Oh, please. So, they would have done anything for there not to be a Brian Noem already in your life.
Oh, that's true. It's interesting. I totaled out that car too. So that was the last year they gave a car to the Snow Queen.
So sad. Well, I laughed in your book. You were talking about when you first ran for office, and the biggest controversy you faced was you had some speeding tickets. And now it all makes sense. Now, I mean, they're going to give you a black Trans Am at, age 19. You're going to drive it fast. That's what's the point of having it if you're not going to do that?
Well, I had a dad that was like, you get to where you're going fast and get back here with those parts for that tractor, or hurry up and go get this and don't make me wait. That was how we were raised. So, and if we got speeding tickets, we paid them and kept going. But that was
ridiculous. Let's not revisit. That's a stupid controversy, but whatever. I just thought when seeing the Trans Am, that brings it all together. But I do want to talk to you about your dad, because that was one of the saddest and sweetest parts of your book. And I have to say, I can relate. I lost my own dad when he was 45. Your dad died in an accident on your farm when he was 49. And you go through it in great detail. For the YouTube audience, we're putting pictures up of the governor's dad and mom. And it was horrifying what happened to him in this corn auger. It was like the auger couldn't be turned on to save him after having gotten sucked in, because it would have ensured his death. And you write in the book something to the effect of, I was sitting there in the hospital waiting to hear, if they could have revived him. in the same hospital you were supposed to be late that same night for birthing classes for your child with whom you were 8 months pregnant. And instead they came in and told you there was nothing they could do and that he was gone. And you were in sort of a fight with him over something silly. And Kristi, the exact same thing happened with me. You know, I was only 15, but I lost my dad that night in a sudden heart attack in our case, and was in a fight with him over something stupid. And it's just one of those things where, you know, they would never want you or me to be walking around feeling guilt or anything other than their love for us thereafter, but you're only human.
Yeah. That's the one thing I wish I could tell people is that you're not ever guaranteed another day. You're not guaranteed you're going to see these people again. We have enough tragedies in our family and in our country that's the reality. And sometimes you watch people just throw people away in their lives that, you know, is unnecessary. So I talk a little bit in the book about having him be gone and, just the fact that I wish I hadn't complained so much when he asked me to do stuff. I wish I would have sat down and visited more when I had the chance to. He always hurt. His back hurt so bad. He was always in pain because he worked so hard. And he used to ask us to rub his feet at night. And I just remember thinking, I wish that I just, you know, would have not once, you know, tried to sneak upstairs without him seeing me so I didn't have to rub his feet for him so he would feel better. You know, that's the kind of stuff that you just don't realize you're missing out on until they're already gone. It was very difficult because he was such a larger than life person. And I'm sure your dad was like this to you too. You know, your whole life as a young girl revolves kind of around your dad. And when all of a sudden they're gone, you can't even imagine what the next 24 hours is going to look like, much less the rest of your life.
Then you found these tapes where, in addition to talking a lot about corn, he talked about you. He talked about you and your siblings and talked about how tough you were, how he could see that you were such a tough kid. And that must have been so comforting in a way. It's just sort of a way of shoring you up from beyond, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, my dad wasn't a talker. He was a doer. And so it took me probably 5 or 6 months before I could clean out his pickup. You know, farmers and ranchers live in their pickup. Everything they have, their notes, their pens, their tools. You know, even I talk about the fact that he always had a case of warm 7-Up and old candy bars or whatever in his back seat of his truck. And, you know, everything that was important was in his pickup. And it took me a long time to go clean out his pickup after he passed away. But when I did, I opened up the console and there was dozens of these little, you know, dictation tapes in there and a little tape recorder that, you know, doctors talked into back then. And it was his voice and it was just him talking. I had been running the farm then, a very large operation, a lot of people working for me, a lot of men working for me that were middle-aged that didn't want to be working for a 22-year-old pregnant lady or a lady with a brand new baby, and getting challenged on every decision I was making. And here on these tapes was every answer I could have ever wanted. What soil type was the best for what crop, what to do with cattle, what to do if we ever got into financial trouble. And then some of these tapes were years and years old. In fact, he'd moved them from pickup to pickup. And when he'd gotten a new pickup, he just moved them. And there was a tape in there almost 10 years old where he talked about us kids, what he thought our strengths were, what our weaknesses were. And it was just amazing because this is not something my dad rarely said, you know, I love you, much less talked about us. And that was when I knew everything was going to be okay. I thought, if God loves me this much, that he literally gave me all the answers that I needed in his own voice, then we're going to be fine. And I think that was the first night that I finally could sleep because I felt the peace that I knew we were going to be okay.
I can't imagine that find and that feeling. I mean, I can remember in my own case, this is 1985 when my dad died, and just re-listening over and over to his voice on the answering machine tape. I remember doing that. Just playing the answering machine, you know, you've reached the Kellys. That sort of a treasure trove, that there is some divine intervention there. And I couldn't help, of course, but think, my God, if he could see you now, he would be so proud of you. I mean, it makes me root for you. It makes me so glad you wrote the book and so glad that you decided to lead, you know, notwithstanding the many challenges thrown your way.
Well, I mean, I appreciate, sometimes I think he might think I'm kind of crazy, but I think that, yeah, he was pretty incredible. And my mom is probably the only woman in the world that could have been married to him, because all he did was work all the time. I remember her, you know, as we were going out the door to work all the time, her shoving food in our pockets and, here, just eat this on the way to the field. And, you know, facilitating everything and taking care of everybody. It was really unique, but you know what? We were together. And that's what I think so many families don't make a priority today, is that it just wasn't an option not to be with our family. And I think that's one of the reasons why we turned out and we ended up with a value system that really does give us this quality of life we get to enjoy.
And one more for you, Stephen Miller. We are closing out with Stephen Miller, not the Stephen L. Miller, who sometimes comes on our show as a pundit, but Stephen Miller, who's been working for Trump as a top policy guy since the first term. He's the border guru, and he will serve as deputy chief of staff for policy for President Trump. No confirmation hearings needed, which is good because they can't stand him. But he was behind a lot of those policies that worked really well under Trump. We had him on in May of 2023, and episode 549, and he's already been tapped for Trump to get right back to it. Here's a little of Stephen.
Is the goal just to create more Democratic voters? What is it? Is it bleeding heart liberalism? Why would they be allowing this kind of crisis to emerge from our South and now be bussed up to the North, such that virtually all these major cities are going to feel the pain?
Now, people ask me this question a lot, and I've reflected on it a great deal, because people want to know, how is it possible that a entire administration and all the members of Congress who support that administration and all of the outside groups that support that administration could be so willingly complicit in a policy that's yielding so much human misery? You have human trafficking, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking, as even the New York Times documented, particularly with minors, on a scale that has never been witnessed before. Hundreds of thousands of minors have been trafficked into the country. You have the fentanyl deaths setting records year after year, families being separated in a permanent and irrevocable way, where the only way they can visit loved ones is at a cemetery, at a graveyard. And then you have gangs that have operational control of our territory, that are abusing people and murdering people on both sides of the border, the destruction of the labor market for the working class and the working poor, and the decimation of our healthcare system and our education system, to name but a few social ills. And I think the answer is exactly what you said, and it's very straightforward. California was once the most conservative free state in the country. If you wanted to live the American dream, you wanted to get your family in the station wagon, drive across country, and just strike out and see if you could start a small business or get a good job or just earn a good living, you went to California. That's what you did. And this was the state that not only elected Reagan governor, but also voted in presidential elections for conservatives for national office for almost the entirety of the 20th century up until 1992. And that was the tipping point. And from 1992 until today, only leftists for the highest office in the land. And the reason for that is because mass migration turns politics leftward. And there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, one is that people who come from countries that have no history of limited government and no experience with limited government don't find that to be intuitive. So that's one reason. Just the actual voters themselves, they would say, well, why wouldn't I vote for higher taxes on someone who's not me to give services to somebody who is me, right? That's intuitive. Mm-hmm. It's very intuitive to say, there's people who are richer than me, so I'll tax them more, and then you're going to give me more money, right? That's intuitive. It's not intuitive, what we have or have had in America, to say, if more people who aren't you also have freedom, then they will also be productive, and they will also create more jobs, and then those jobs will pay higher wages. But there's a secondary effect that pulls politics left, which is the destruction of the middle class. When you have good, high-paying middle-class jobs, that forms the center of a conservative society. a strong family and a strong community where people are able to get a job that can pay a living wage, that can support a family, where you can have, if you want to, a one-parent working home, if you want to, a two-parent working home, but either way, you're financially secure. And you have a good education system and a good healthcare system. When you completely destabilize the labor market and the social safety net, people then begin demanding more and more and more government services because the jobs aren't paying enough. So you need more earned income tax credit, and you need to have more food stamps, and you need to have more public housing, and the education system can't keep up. So you got to keep funneling more and more and more money into that. And nobody has health insurance. I mean, how many years have we heard, Megyn, there's 30 million people who don't have health insurance. We need socialized medicine. We need socialized medicine. The vast majority of people in this country who do not have health insurance are not citizens of this country. There are many American citizens who don't have health insurance, to be clear, and they should get it, and we should make sure they do have it. But the vast majority of people who do not have insurance of any kind, in any way, any shape or form whatsoever, are not U.S. citizens. And but that's used by political parties to demand free government services. So an open border both imports the voters who will vote for one party and one ideology, but it also changes the political landscape of an entire community. So you end up with the Manhattanization of America, where you have these very large cities where nothing works, nothing is functional, nothing is safe, nothing is efficient. And the solution is always going to be you have to tax more and spend more.
It's bleak, Stephen. It's so bleak. I've been listening to the reporting on the new approach by the Biden administration, and it's all over the board, even amongst the left. I listen to NPR, I listen to the New York Times, The Daily, and read the Times as well. And even they seem to be struggling with whether these are going to be effective measures, whether they're going to be ineffective, or whether they might be even more effective than the Trump administration. They seem to actually want to be toying with, he's going to be tougher. He's going to be tougher with these reforms than Trump was on people trying to get across the border, because he's saying, if you try to do it illegally and you get caught, you're out for 5 years and you can't reapply. So you better go through the proper channels to get into this country, or else, which is new for him.
Yeah. Right. So this version of events requires us to believe that he canceled every single policy that was working incredibly well, and then put in place a whole series of policies designed to make it as easy to enter the country illegally as possible. But it was really just secretly a head fake to come up with some new and different and better plan. The people who are driving immigration policy, I talked to ICE officers, I talked to border agents, and obviously I know the names of the higher ups at DHS, and of course in the White House too. Ideologically, the people who are setting policy believe that borders are racist, that borders are wrong, and that we don't have any right, morally or otherwise, to deny people entry into this country. The way they look at it, to be very blunt, Megyn, is they see, and to use sort of the language of the day, they see America as a racist colonial superpower. So this is their worldview. They think that we stole wealth and riches and plundered and pillaged from foreign countries, from indigenous people, from the developing world. And at a moral level, they see this as the ultimate act of wealth redistribution. So, we talk about reparations, Megyn. They see an open border as reparations for the developing world that they believe, not just America, but they believe the West, from the going back to the times of the British Parliament back when we were colonies. But they see that the West stole and plundered this wealth, and they think this is a form of redistribution to those who they believe are rightfully entitled to the riches of this nation. For the true believers. Biden doesn't have much going on upstairs. He's a party man, and so he is doing what his party is telling him to do, and he is doing it completely. But for the ideologues that are driving this policy, that is absolutely what they believe. And that is why they are constitutionally incapable of saying the sentence, illegal immigration is wrong. If you come into the country illegally, you have no path to release. You will be detained. You will be deported. You will be going home. And you, if possible, will be sent to jail. And if you try again, you'll be sent to jail for more than a year. One of the things that we did in the Trump administration is we aggressively prosecuted. So we didn't just deport people, but we aggressively prosecuted immigration crime. Not just immigration fraud, but 1325, USC 1325, which is the misdemeanor illegal entry, and then 1326, which is the felony illegal entry. And we aggressively prosecuted illegal border crossing to send the message that what you're doing is criminal. This is criminal. And if American citizens go to jail for the minorest violations, you get one little thing wrong in your tax forms, or you make one little mistake interacting with a regulatory agency, or you make one little mistake in Washington in terms of what box you check here or there, and you spend years and years in jail. But if you come across the country illegally in plain violation of federal law, nothing happens to you. That's wrong. And we said that's wrong. And so we prosecuted people for doing that. And Biden has completely gutted all of our prosecution initiatives. I don't remember the numbers.
Okay, but here's what he says he's coming back with. I should have been more clear about this at the top. Okay, I mentioned the new rule that they say is going to bar most people from applying for asylum if they cross the border illegally or fail to first apply for safe harbor in another country. So they're kind of saying you now need to apply for asylum in another country, which is just so obvious, right? Of course, if you're truly fleeing prosecution, you're fine with Mexico. You just need to get away from the prosecution. That's not what it's about. They want to be in the United States, and they want to do it fast, and they don't want to follow the rules. Migrants who get an appointment through a new app they're putting out, the ONE app set up by the Border Patrol, will be exempt from this threat. So you're supposed to go on some app and create an appointment to, have your, asylum claim scheduled for hearing. Then they say, this is the point they say is in their favor, the administration will expand expedited removal processes under Title VIII, the decades-old section of the U.S. Code that deals with immigration law. This allows the government to remove from the country anyone unable to establish a legal basis, such as approved asylum claims. It would bar these migrants from the country for 5 years. So they're saying, if we catch you trying to get into the country or in the country and you haven't made an appointment through the app and you haven't been processed as, a true asylum seeker by applying for asylum in Mexico or someplace else first, then we're going to be kicked out and you will be removed and you won't be able to come back for 5 years. Is that a step in the right direction?
This is not true. It's just not what's happening. What is the article that you're reading from? Just so I know.
I'm trying to see the source on this. Let's say I'm reading from my packet, which my team puts together.
Sorry.
The sources are all over the place. New York Post, Political, New York Post, and Daily Mail.
The thing about immigration reporting in this country is that so few people who do immigration stories actually understand immigration law that they fall for literally any spin the administration pushes to them. So I've been seeing for 2 years, they always announce, there's a new crackdown. In the middle of the Haiti migrant camps, they were saying the administration has some tough new crackdown plan. They push out this fake story every few months when the PR gets bad, and I hope everybody moves on to the next thing. If you really want to break it down, the regulation in question says that you have a rebuttable presumption of ineligibility if you didn't apply in a previous country. The word rebuttable meaning that you can overcome it by asking, again, to see an immigration judge. So in immigration law, Megyn, there's all kinds of things that could sound tough on paper that dissolve upon contact with reality because of how enforcement actually works. If you allow an alien to seek a lengthy process when they enter this country, then there's no way for Border Patrol to remove that person. If an alien shows up from Peru and tells a story and says, I couldn't apply in Mexico because the cartels threatened me, so I need to see a caseworker and then I need to see an immigration judge. Megyn, that person is not going anywhere but to the city of their choice, St. Louis, Omaha, Nebraska, New York City. After 2 years of this, you think immigration reporters would stop falling for the same crap. The illegal aliens who want to get in will get in. It's happening right now. It's happening every day. They show up at the border in the morning and they're on to the next city in the evening. You see them on TV going on to the destination of their choice. Then they text their friends and their family with their new phones and say, hey, I just got in. The other point, though, about this is that in reality, the way it works on the ground is that when you have more aliens in your facility than there are caseworkers to interview them, the difference between those two populations gets released.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Tomorrow, we are bringing you another future member of Trump's cabinet. It's on, my full interview that made so many waves, for which Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself has thanked us repeatedly, saying it was the beginning of his revival, of him being able to speak in forums like Facebook and Instagram without getting censored. And you will see we had to heavily fact check him with his critics' claims throughout just to get this thing to air. But it was worth it. The man is probably going to be running Health and Human Services now. And you will see tomorrow the beginning of it all. RFKJ tomorrow. See you then.